Hello. In my last video, video 20, I talked about how difficult I found it to run games set in Tolkien's Middle-earth, sort of Lord of the Rings, because I was quite precious about the setting and people weren't playing the game that I wanted them to, which was egotistical and a bit snobbish, but that's just the way things turned out. So this time I want to talk about a game that I found it easier to run, and that game is Star Wars the role-playing game from 1987. Specifically the first edition. I love the first edition. Second edition was cool, the revised edition was good, and there's been other sort of interpretations of it since then, but first edition for me is where it's at. Now, I love Star Wars, I grew up with Star Wars, massive fan of it. I saw it when it was in the cinema, but I was too young to really remember it. In fact, the first cinema experience I do remember was Clash of the Titans, with the Ray Harryhausen effects, mint film. That's another video all of its own, because I went to the exhibition a couple of years ago in Edinburgh to see all the original Ray Harryhausen models. I'm going off on a tangent, I'll stop there, I'll talk about that another time. So anyway, yeah, I grew up with Star Wars, and then I was lucky to meet a guy called Mark Newbold in about 1983, and he was a huge Star Wars fan. Toys, books, records, the works. He had everything. He was completely and utterly sort of absorbed by it. And so we got on famously. In fact, I remember the first time I went around to his house and he loaned me his little Scouts on a speeder bike, and I played with that for a week, and then we were just best mates. We've been best mates since. He's my best mate in the entire world. So, a little bit of history. So we already love Star Wars, and we love Star Wars so much we were writing things like short stories, and we're making these cassette tape dramas with our own characters. So the only Star Wars role playing that I'd done after 1984 when I started gaming was a couple of games in Traveller. But then this game came out in 1987, and I remember seeing the adverts in the magazines and getting really excited about it. Wasn't too sure about what I was going to make of it because I was so used to Dungeons and Dragons and Final Fantasy and other systems. But the moment I got this, I read it cover to cover and got down pat with the system almost straight away. Very intuitive system. Basically, it's a D6 die pool, and the more D6 you get to roll, the easier it is to hit target numbers, basically. Really, really good characters, melodrama using the Force, starships, everything that you love about it is in here. Now, what I love about Star Wars is the melodrama. I love the action, the adventure, the story, the tragedy behind it all. Absolutely wonderful. And this book captured it really, really, really well. But by the time we came to play Star Wars, we were already primed for it. Because me and Mark had spent so much time creating these tapes and these short stories and writing these books and comics. We already had characters and we had an idea of the kind of games that we wanted to run, and we also had a setting, a place called the Setting Sector, which was properly formed once the role-playing game came out, because we were gaming with other people and we wanted an area of space that we could call our own, so we created the Setting Sector. And I liken it to when they wrote the Han Solo books, the original books, Han Solo at Star's End and Han Solo's Revenge, etc., and The Lost Legacy. And they set it in a place called the corporate sector, so it's its own place. He could have his own adventures, but it wasn't affecting the setting at large. So he wasn't even though it was probably mentioned, he wasn't actually interacting with anybody from the Star Wars saga from the movies, which I thought was absolutely brilliant, absolutely fantastic. So that's what we wanted to do. So we had the setting sector, and I mean, quite literally, Mark actually spent a long time sort of cataloguing everything we created. And quite literally, we created hundreds of characters, more than 1,000 planets and locations and space stations and asteroids and all sorts of stuff. We'd literally gone nuts. And in fact, the sector got so huge, with little bordering sectors on it as well, we had to call it a region of space. So it became the Cedapar cluster. And it's set just off the galactic plane. It's a whole bunch of sectors sort of on their own. And it's where we can have our own adventures. And yeah, the Empire turned up, and there was also a little bit of interaction with known things like the Empire and the Underworld and what have you. But yeah, the Setting Sector was its own breathing place. And once the role-playing game came out, we found it easy to expand on that because the role-playing game gave us everything that we needed. And all the books that came out would use as reference tools, add stuff to it. I remember, I think it was Tramp Freighters, the Galaxy Guide, was it Galaxy Guide 6? When that came out, absolutely brilliant because we loved playing free traders. Our games were more sort of underworld based, so we were doing a lot of stuff, on the sneaker side of the galaxy. But they were still heroes. They were still trying to do the right thing, even though there were, some of their sort of jobs and choices were a little bit questionable. But because I was always fascinated by the world of Han Solo, so when Jedi came out, you saw all that stuff with Jabba the Hutt's throne room. I was interested in all the stories behind all those characters and what the underworld was like. So that's what we explored in our games, and we still had our big heroics and the rebellion versus the Empire, etc., etc. But yeah, that's mainly what we explored in our games. And I think the reason why it worked so well was because we loved Star Wars so much, and we had no expectations of what other people would bring to the table. Because we opened up that setting to everybody. We had lots of different people come in who were adding their own stuff, adding their own characters, running their own games, spending time in the setting sector. And those people came in and helped us build the sector, but we had no expectations as to how they would approach Star Wars, because Star Wars was so open, everybody's interpretation was either fun or different. And that's absolutely fantastic. But we only had 2 rules. And those 2 rules were that you could not do anything in any of your games which would interfere, contradict, or otherwise be influenced by what was happening in the greater galaxy. So you couldn't sort of suddenly turn up at Yavin and bump Luke Skywalker out the way and blow up the Death Star yourself, or you know what I mean. You could say that your characters were present at certain places. I had this one character called Carl Mirror, I think his name was, and you know the scene in Empire Strikes Back, and you got the last of the rebels running to the base, and then the one shot comes in, lands next to a guy, explodes next to his feet, and he staggers forward and then falls and rolls. That was my character. I said that's Carl Mirror, and he was so badly injured. Somebody went back and got him, but he was so badly injured by that hit, he became really jaded and really sort of. He didn't like the rebellion anymore. He basically scared the life out of him, so he tried to find a life doing something else and became a free trader. And that sort of stuff's fine. That was interesting. It wasn't impacting the bigger story too much. And also the second rule was you couldn't have a character more powerful than any of the established characters in the Star Wars trilogy at the time, or in Star Wars canon. And those were the only rules, basically, because then that gave our sector a sense of realism, like a sense of reality. It was a real place. It was his own real place in the Star Wars galaxy, and that's why it was so exciting. And yeah, sometimes it would go off the rails a little bit. Some people made silly decisions, or would have people coming in to run games who did stuff that we weren't 100% on board with, which didn't feel very Star Wars. I mean, I was guilty of that myself. I ran some games which weren't very Star Wars. I mean, I'd seen Aliens in 1986, and the amount of times I ran a game which was basically Aliens. Yeah, well, you can imagine I was an impressionable 16-year-old at the time, well, an impressionable teenager. It was wowed by the film. But yeah, we used Star Wars for everything, and it was just really, really easy because, like I say, everybody's on the same page. We had complete strangers come in who'd never played the Star Wars role-playing game before. Had probably spent 10 years playing Dungeons and Dragons, or some other game, and they knew nothing about the game, but they knew Star Wars. And because the game system was so easy to get used to and understand, they basically just settled into the game almost straight away. And they had their expectations. We gave them the 2 rules: no contradiction, no characters more powerful. But they literally got involved and they settled into the game almost immediately. And some players, I mean, the campaign lasted for about 10 years. So some players stayed for those 10 years. I mean, me, Mark, and Paul were probably the key ones who basically did the full. Were based there for nearly every single game. And then we had loads of other people coming in and contributing: Louis, Darren, Jason, Andy. You know what I mean? Loads of people were coming in and contributing to the game and making the setting sector bigger. So yeah, so the easiest game I've ever played is Star Wars, the role-playing game, first edition. I mean, I like the other editions. Although saying that, I wasn't too hot on the D20 edition because it was literally shoehorning Star Wars into the OGL or the open license, and I didn't like that because the system was just terrible. It didn't suit the style of Star Wars, and probably because I was so used to playing a game which was fast and fluid and intuitive and cinematic, that felt a little bit more crunchy and it slowed it down. I thought Star Wars Saga was a little bit better because it kind of it sort of trimmed it back a little bit and made it a little bit more playable, and they were quite good looking books as well. And then when Fantasy Flight released the role playing game Edge of the Empire, a friend of mine got me the sort of beta copy book and brought it back, where you had to get the stickers off the board and put them onto your own dice, and trying to figure out why. It turns out that we're going to use funny shaped dice, so they supplied the stickers to go on the dice, so to get you used to that. And I enjoyed it, but I just wasn't enamoured by it. It's the funny shaped dice a little bit because I'm a bit of a traditionalist, so I know I want my dice to have pips or numbers on. I just want to be able to roll my dice, add them up, look at a number, and then carry on. I don't want to have to interpret 5 or 6 different symbols. But it was a lot of fun, and I think I preferred playing that more than I did running it. I only ran it a couple of times, and I kind of lost interest because I was too busy trying to focus on what the dice meant, and I just want to roll dice and then carry on. I've got a story to tell, or we've got a story to tell, I should say. But when I played it, yeah, it was much better. That's the GM's problem now. Let me just crack on with my character. But yeah, it was a fantastic game. It was a fantastic period of my gaming history. Probably one of my favourite games. Well, it was one of my biggest and favourite campaigns. And if I was asked to run Star Wars role-playing game first edition tomorrow, I would do just like that on an instant. You give me 1 hour to get ready, to create a story, to get an adventure, and then I'll have a campaign for you in no time. It's just so easy to run. And I used to own every single book, second and first edition. I was only missing 2 adventure journals. But I ended up, and I've kept my original books, and I've kept the source book and the Imperial and Rebel source book, and my original Games Master screen and the Rules Companion, all from first edition. But everything else ends up selling on, which I do regret, but it was necessary at the time. So oh well, that's life. But I've still got all my original books, and they're all still in really good condition. And yeah, if you ask me to run that, then no problem at all. I'll do that straight away. But one of the good things that came out of this, and this is a plug for my mate Mark Newbold, is that the Setting Sector got so big he started to catalogue it. And in the late 1990s, Mark and a friend Louis started up a website called lightsaber.co.uk. It's lightsaber spelt in the UK fashion, and sadly it doesn't exist anymore. And he was using that for Star Wars news, and he was also building up the catalogue of not only our setting, but all the short stories and comics that we've done as well. And we had about 4 or 5 novels. There was about 120 short stories, and there was a comic called Quest for Freedom, which Mark was having drawn, which was really, really good. So we had a lot of, and then we had the catalogue of all the planets and all the locations, starships, characters, equipment. Everything was on there. New aliens, new worlds, new cultures. We even had a star map, which I'll come back to in just a second. So it was just incredible. It was absolutely huge. But Mark, being the massive Star Wars fan he is, started writing for publications. And in fact, now Mark is one of the regular article writers for Star Wars Insider. He was writing for other magazines, Starburst, and then he started going to shows. And now he's got a website called Fantha Tracks, which again I'll link down below. And he is taken all over the world to cover conventions, to do interviews, talk to the stars. What he's doing is absolutely huge, and it's like a lifelong dream for him, and the guy's absolutely amazing. But the 2 great things for me that came out of it was that a few years ago they released the Atlas of Star Wars. There was an official atlas with star maps, and he managed to he asked the artist of that who had interviewed, and they talked quite a lot, to actually use the formatting of that book to create a simple star map for our Setting Sector, which he did. So now we've got it laid out officially. Absolutely brilliant. But the greatest thing he did was that he wrote for Build Your Own Millennium Falcon, and he was writing some background material. And in one of the issues, he put in where an engine was built, and he said the engine, I think it was the Emperor's personal shuttle, and he said the engine was built at Desando Dynamics in the Cedar cluster, and those were Setting Sector locations, and they got printed. So technically, the Setting Sector is part of the canon now. Technically, I don't know how. Legally, I don't think how that works, but but yeah, absolutely incredible. So, and to see that in print and to see that there, we'd love for the Setting Sector to be recognised. It needs a really good strip back, and I'd love to redo it at some point. Just having the time, unfortunately. But as a Star Wars setting, yeah, it was absolutely stunning. And the great thing about it was our playground, and people came into our playground. We had a lot of players who used to come into our playground, into our sandbox, to play our Star Wars game. So yeah, there was Rebels versus Empire, and there was all the usual Star Wars stuff, but it was all happening in the world and the setting that we created, because it was just so easy to run, and it was just so easy to get into. So yeah, so there we go. The easiest game. This video is basically why I find it so easy to run Star Wars role playing games. Everybody knows Star Wars. They've all got a visual and they've got an emotional cue. They know what it's about. You can just get straight into it with absolutely no messing. So yeah, so I'd say that's it for this video. Probably went off on a bit of a tangent, but yeah, thanks for listening. Ta-ra.